You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It is episode 3 of season number 4. Cubs, Kyle Tucker, arbitration debacle. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow on all the socials. Fly the W670 on Twitter, Instagram, and Fly the W on Facebook, or email us at flythew670@gmail.com. All right, Crawly, towards the end of last week, the deals needed to be set in place or you're going to arbitration. And got some interesting things happening with the Cubs on the good side and the bad side of this.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Thursday was the big day for the MLB and the players' arbitration deadline. Just a reminder of that process, right? It's players are under team control until their 6th year. So you hold the rights. And so they can only negotiate with you. They're not free agents. But if players and their teams cannot reach an agreement by the deadline, which was on Thursday, then both parties have to submit a proposed salary figure. And then there's a third party hearing that happens with adjudicators that determine the final salary figure in February. So with eligibility, right? Players become eligible for arbitration after completing at least 3 years of service time, but before 6 years when they hit that free agency mark. And so this year, the Cubs had 4 players that were arbitration eligible. Relievers Eli Morgan and Nate Pearson, starter Justin Steele, and newly acquired right fielder Kyle Tucker. Okay. And so not really looking at Pearson and Morgan, but when you look at Steele, Steele is now a 3rd year. He has 3 years of service time. He doesn't become a free agent until 2028, Dustin. And so a lot of people have been calling for the Cubs to extend Steele now. And that way you kind of buy out the rest of his arbitration years, right? And so you basically sign him to a multi-year contract and then you eliminate this process. And you know, I'd like to see what Justin does after this year, but the closer you get to that 5th year, the less likely a player is going to sign it because you're so close to free agency, right?
Absolutely right.
So the way it works is players like Kyle Tucker and Justin Steele, you're getting them for a steal compared to what they'd be worth on the free agent market, right? If Justin Tucker, if Kyle Tucker was on the free agent market right now, you're looking at 300 to 400 million. But because he's not a free agent, you can get him only 16 million. And so that's the thing, is that right now these players are cheap, but you can extend Kyle or Justin Steele. And so that would be something that people want. Are you happy with them not doing that just yet?
Well, I listen, are you ready? Are you ready to go like 200 million with him already? Right. I mean, I think this is part of the process with him, right? This is what you do. He's a guy that you drafted, you've groomed, you've brought up. He has had some injury issues. He has missed some time. I don't think they need to do it just yet, but I think they should be talking. Absolutely, they should be talking, right?
Right, absolutely. And so that's the thing, is if he does keep getting better, and again, that injury, that opening day injury was a fluke. I don't think he ever really kind of recovered from that. But like I said, the closer you get, the less inclined the player is going to be. If you have 3 more years of arbitration, well, then you're probably more likely to sign because that's big money right now. You don't have to worry about, if I get injured or something happens.
Right.
And so now, with Kyle Tucker, it's a little bit of a different situation because when the Cubs traded a big haul to acquire him, they knew he'd be a free agent after 2025, which was a risky move by Jed, but you and I were both ecstatic about it, right? To me, it was an all-in kind of move. It's the type of move a big boy club makes. And so the deadline comes on Thursday, and all day news trickles out when the players get signed for every organizations and fans are watching. Now the deadline's at 12 p.m. But we don't really know. They don't right away at 12 o'clock just release the list. It starts kind of coming out there as they're dotting the T's and crossing the I's on these things. One thing to keep in mind, Dustin, there's a guy named Matt Swartz on Twitter. He's an economist and a baseball consultant, and he creates a model to project salaries for arbitration eligible players. And if you go to the website, MLB Trade Rumors, they've been using this for 14 years, and it's a pretty accurate source when it comes to projecting what a player should make in arbitration, right? So the first news we get is Nate Pearson. Pearson and the Cubs reached a 1-year, $1.35 million deal for 2025. That was slightly below what Swartz projected. Swartz projected $1.4 million. Cubs and Pearson agree $1.35 million. The next one was the big one that came out, Dustin. Justin Steele and the Cubs agreed to a 1-year, $6.55 million deal for 2025. That was a little bit above of what Swartz projected for Steele, which was $6.4 million. So Steele gets a little bit more than what his projections were. Next came the new Eli Morgan. Remember, the Cubs got him from the Guardians this offseason. And so Morgan agreed to a 1-year, $950,000 contract. That was below the $1 million Swartz projected by about $500,000. So you could see that it's give or take a little bit, right?
Right.
So the Cubs signed 3 of their 4 arbitration-eligible players, leaving 1 more left, the most important of them all, Kyle Tucker. Now, Swartz projected that Tucker should make around $15.8 million, according to his calculations for the 2025 season. We're watching the clock, Dustin, and nothing. And people are starting to get in panic. It can mean one of 2 things. It could mean maybe they're working on an extension, or maybe they haven't just come up with an agreement yet, or a little bit of both. But then at 8:21 p.m., Jesse Rogers reports that they could not come to an agreement on a salary for 2025. And so these numbers, then what the next step of the process is, you have to file what you think the player's worth. And so these numbers weren't before the deadline. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, I don't. I want you to, let's tap the brakes a little bit. So, that like arbitration is the thing that's going to happen potentially can happen between the 2 sides, right? Yes. We know that. So the Cubs go to them and are negotiating something behind the scenes, and then they don't agree to it. So then it says, okay, we couldn't come up to an agreement, so it goes to arbitration. And then the Cubs tell the arbitration, we offered 15, and Kyle comes back and said we wanted 17. Is that how it works?
No. It's so what happens at this point is it could have been higher, could have been lower, and then this is what you're going to file. So when you go to arbitration, the Cubs say, we believe Kyle Tucker is worth $15 million for 2025. And Tucker's camp will say, we believe they're worth 17.5. So we don't know exactly what numbers were thrown out in the negotiations, or if they were working on an extension and just ran out of time, how close they were, how close they weren't, we don't know. But once the deadline passes and you don't come up with an agreement, these are the numbers that are filed that'll be used in the arbitration case, in the hearing.
Gotcha.
Okay. And so that's a good point to kind of keep in mind here. But I got to ask, Dustin.
Let's go back though a second. You mentioned the guy that we should be checking out. Did he have numbers on this as well? Did he?
Yes.
Where did he? Okay, so where did he think Kyle Tucker belonged?
15.8.
Okay, so right what the Cubs basically gave him, right?
What the Cubs filed later.
Okay, what they offered, right? What they're willing to pay him.
They could have what they're willing to pay him, but they could have offered less when they were in the negotiations. We don't know.
But that's the part we don't know.
Right.
Correct. That's the part we don't know. I mean, Listen, at the end of the day, Crawly, let's cut to the chase. Okay. It from a business standpoint, I understand it. They don't have to do anything, right? They don't have to, but it looks cheap. It just comes off looking cheap.
Dustin, we've talked about it, and we have the audio clips. I know you've been not really happy with Ken Rosenthal, Jeff Passan. There's been other people that have sat there and absolutely
even my guy John Heyman.
John Heyman,
right? Heyman's killed the Cubs about being in a big market and you guys need to play big time baseball and all that kind of stuff.
Right. This has been a theme that's been going on not just locally, because Cub fans are always going to say, "Oh, ownership cheap." This has been going on nationally, that people are talking about this. And a lot of times when you have these disagreements, it's with guys that are kind of maybe like second, third year players, not guys that you traded. They traded a good haul, Dustin. Isaac Paredes is a good third baseman, and he was controllable for another couple of years. Okay. Right. You gave up Cam Smith, your number 1 draft pick that a lot of people think is going to be a very good player. And you gave up Hayden Wesniewski, who was going to be on your 25-man roster, either as a starter or a swingman. So you gave up a lot. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, especially on why you would argue over
$2 million, right? $2 million,
right, a couple $1 million, which is basically in today's market a mediocre reliever.
Right. It might be a bench bat, right, or a mediocre reliever. I don't think, again, now later on we could be, that $2 million helped us secure Roki. That $2 million helped the Cubs secure, a power arm to put at the back end of this bullpen. But right now, they're sitting there with this Cody Bellinger money and now $2 million that might be the difference between whether or not Kyle Tucker takes your $400 million or somebody else's $400 million next year.
Right. And the Roki money, though, is a little bit different. That's international free agent pool money. So that's kind of like to the side.
Kind of sad, right? It's kind of sad, right?
So, but
bad example, but it's just the idea.
Right. I get 100% what you're saying. And here's a couple of things that our listeners have to keep in mind, right? The Cubs and Tucker's representatives can still negotiate and come up with an agreement before the arbitration hearing. It happens plenty of times. Okay. That arbitration hearing is going to be sometime in February. Okay. Now, sometimes an agreement is reached minutes before they are literally in the room, and they can come up with an agreement up to the very moment that the hearing starts. And so
now the argument, Crawly, the reason the Cubs might be doing this, right? That the pushback could be because Kyle Tucker did not play as much as, the Astros or he would have wanted to have played last year, right? He dealt with injuries. So
right.
The Cubs want to make sure. I'm saying that could be something that I'm assuming if they end up whiteboarding it up to the arbitrator, this is something they're going to use against Kyle Tucker.
Right. And this is where you start to get into issues. And I don't think it's going to go that far. Okay. Now, according to Jordan Bastian, dating back to 1980, when this all started, the Cubs have reached, so 1980, we're talking 45 years roughly. They've only had a hearing 8 times and only 3 times since 1994. The last, Ian Happ went to the hearing with the Cubs in 2021 and he won his case, beat the Cubs in the arbitration hearing. But Dustin, like you were talking about the whiteboard and saying, well, he was injured, they are very ugly, these hearings, right? And many times representatives will tell players not even to show up because you don't want to even hear what they're going to say about you, right? It's just, you don't want that in your head affecting how your season goes. Now, There's no way in hell do I think the Cubs and Tucker make it that way. This could be settled before February. I think it might even be settled this next week. You want to, So right now, you're like the Crawly meter's not off the chart. You're not as upset as I thought you were going to be about this. I'm upset because of the way it looks. That's what bothers me. This is not necessary.
But there's still time to fix it.
It's time to fix it. He's going to play for the Cubs in 2025. That there's no question about that.
And no matter what, he's got to be motivated to play because he's sitting on a massive payday. So it's not like, well, you know what, I'm just going to sit around and pout. Like he's going to be motivated.
But here's where I'm angry, Dustin, and this is where I was pissed off. It's an embarrassing look. We just talked about the cheapness, right? The Cubs, in my opinion, right now should be doing everything in their power to make Kyle Tucker happy. Have his car washed while the game's going on. Give him Jed's parking spot. Whatever he needs to be happy. Now, as always, I'm listening to Inside the Clubhouse on 670 The Score Saturday morning, and Cubs color analyst, friend of the pod, frequent guest on Mully and Haw, Ron Coomer came on to talk with Bruce Levine as Ryan McGuffey were on this weekend. And you can go to the Odyssey app and listen to the whole entire interview. Anytime Coom speaks, it's always good, whether it's on radio, whether it's on TV. Love listening to Coom. Here's what Coom had to say about the whole situation. I think it's interesting.
It's been a topic about the arbitration difference. The Cubs offered 15. Kyle Tucker's at 17.5. This is part of the business, as you know, Coom. Is it a big deal? Because Bruce and I don't believe it is in terms of like long-term anything at the end. It's just part of the business. Kyle Tucker had an arbitration case 2 years ago in Houston that he lost, and things kept going on as is. Do you think this is a big deal at all? Did you ever go through the process and come up short? Because look, $2.5 million is significant. We've seen guys in this town go to arbitration over $200,000. So can you walk us through that as a player and former player, and just talk about, like, are there hurt feelings? How does that whole process work?
There can be. This is the thing that you need to do the research on and have some people on the inside to know what you're dealing with, because some guys do get hurt feelings and some guys don't. Now, you think, well, Tucker's he's this elite player now. He's turned himself into this great player. But, when you start talking about elite players or elite money, he's not made elite money. He's made very good money. And for the common guy walking around Chicago, he's made unbelievable money. But for Major League Baseball, he has not made elite money. So he's still, trying to get there. So that's the thing. And he's still a young guy. So what is he, 27 years old, I believe? So you're still, to me, you run the risk of that being an issue. That's the biggest thing. You don't want that to be an issue. And 8 months from now, when this kid has a 30 home run season and knocks in 100, and now you're trying to be one of the teams that are re-signing him, you don't want that to be something that sticks in his craw a little bit for the amount of money that you're talking about when you're, about to sign an elite player. So
that's
what I thought. That's exactly what I thought. And again, we don't know this guy well enough yet. We don't know Kyle Tucker well enough yet to really know, right, Crawly, to really, really know. But that's what I'm saying. It's just something that's going to stick in his craw.
100%.
It wouldn't mind. I'm just saying it would me. How about you? Let's put ourselves in that situation. Wouldn't that bother you?
It'd bother me.
Right?
Well, here's the thing, Dustin. What do they say? You never get a second chance to make a first impression.
There you go.
The Cubs sign him.
Is that like a cologne? Was that like a cologne commercial? What was that? what was it? The deodorant? What was that? What product?
I'm trying to remember.
90s, 80s was that? I
think it was 80s.
Yeah. Okay.
But the way I look at it is, to me, so for a guy like Kyle Tucker, he was drafted by the Orioles. That's the only organization he knows. He doesn't know anything about the Cubs. He doesn't know anything about Jed or
the
anything
Astros.
like that.
I mean the Astros, right?
The Astros, yeah. And so he doesn't know anything about the Cubs or anything like that. And so when Tucker comes here, the first impression he gets is they don't think I'm worth that much money. They're willing to go to a hearing with me. And so that's the issue right there. Now, when McGuffey was talking, when he kind of led into the question to Coomer, he's like, well, it happened 3 years ago. Well, 3 years ago, he was a younger player. He didn't have the resume, and he wasn't a year before free agency. Okay. Big difference 3 years ago of when Houston took Tucker to arbitration. So you can't compare those two things, apples and oranges. Now he's a year away. And so you mentioned it earlier. When Tucker's a free agent, he's going to have his choice of suitors. Now, it's not a big deal if the Cubs are going to sit there and say, you know what, Kyle Tucker, we're going to give you $800 million for 8 years. Okay. If that happens, he's obviously going to take the money if the Cubs go over the top over everybody else. But Dustin, do you think the Cubs are going to do that?
Probably not. I mean,
no,
not on the surface. No,
they're not going to sit there and blow everybody out of the water. Now, you're now going to have numerous teams competing with the Cubs to sign him after the offseason. And you saw it this year with Juan Soto. Take a look at that example right there. You had teams, and it came down to the two New York teams, both offering over $750 million. So it wasn't like one team blew the other team out of the water. And so now you're going to have to, the money's no longer an issue, once you know you're going to get paid. The question then is, well, do I like the city? Do I like the clubhouse? Do I like the amenity? All the little things. And one of the things we talked about Juan Soto was he was irritated about a slight where some of his people, quote unquote, were getting harassed by Yankee security. And there was also an issue about a skybox. So those tiny little, and I don't think Kyle Tucker's as big a prima donna as Juan Soto, but these little things, these little things, Dustin, could make a difference at the end. To me, you want 17 million, or you want, you could have sat there when the Yankees, they gave Juan Soto $31 million in arbitration, which was $1 million more than the record, which was Shohei Ohtani the year before. So just say, we think you're worth it, Kyle. If Matt Swartz says you're worth 15.6 or 16 million, we think you're worth 17 million. If the Cubs
just kick it up a little bit, right? Just kick it up
1 million.
Just a notch, right?
Right.
It's a weekend series of beer against the Cardinals, right?
Right. It's beer bets for a weekend. That's all it is. It's like, are you kidding me? Why? This just seems dumb. It seems cheap, and it doesn't seem worth the headache. And it's a bad impression, and I don't like it. And if Jed comes out and we get him to, Kyle Tucker signs an extension now before the season starts, I will apologize to Jed Hoyer personally. I'm sure he really cares, but I will apologize.
He'll be looking for that apology next weekend at CubsCon, Crawly.
Right. I will give him a hug and apologize. But I'm just telling you right now, it's dumb and it's not worth it.
All right. Somebody that's not going to be at CubsCon this weekend is Miles Mastrobuoni.
I know I was going to text you. I'm sure you were crying. On Thursday, the Cubs acquired right-handed reliever Matt Festa from the Rangers for cash considerations. Festa's 31. He signed with the Padres last season. He was released by the Padres, signed with the Mets at the end of May, pitched one game for the Mets and was DFA'd, picked up by the Rangers. He appeared in 18 games. So he had played in 19 major league games. He played in more AAA games, but 19 major league games with the Rangers and the Mets. He had a 6-1 record with but a 5.70 ERA. So he throws a fastball that averages 94 miles per hour, a slider, and a changeup. So Dustin, still really no power arm that I've been looking for.
Still looking for it. It's on the back of a milk carton.
To make room for Festa, as we talked about, Miles Masterboni is no longer. Now the Cubs could still hopefully try to sneak him on the minor league roster if nobody picks him up. He's 29, left-handed, plays multiple position, appeared in 110 games across 2 seasons for the Cubs. Batted .219 with 9 RBIs and 16 stolen bases and 1 home run.
So what do you think of that? I mean, you got the guy from the Marlins in that trade for Matt Mervis. He's like the utility infielder at the moment, right? Is he kind of takes the place of Masterboni in that role?
Yeah, we looked before. They have a lot of infielders that are kind of redundant in the position, so it's not a big deal. I'm fine with it, but again, it's just one of those things. And we're going to talk next about Colin Rea.
Another bullpen piece, right? Another bullpen piece,
right? To me, it just looks like bargain shopping. It doesn't, you know what I mean? We're not looking at the athletic.
Well, you got to have a bullpen, Crawly, right? You got to have a bullpen. You got to have arms. You got to have guys. So
you got to have bodies. That's fine. But at what point?
But this is supposed to be the Cubs, right?
Right. It's supposed to be the Cubs. And when are you going to get an elite reliever? Nobody's sitting there telling me that Matt Festa is an elite reliever or somebody that you think is going to be a big difference.
Just a guy.
Right. He's just a guy. He's going to throw innings, which you need guys to throw innings. That's great. But could we get a top tier reliever and then bump everybody back a spot? I'd rather do that.
Right. Absolutely right.
A reunion for the Cubs as they signed right-handed swingman Colin Rea to a 1-year deal with a club option for 2026, pending the completion of a physical. Deal's worth $5 million guaranteed. He's going to earn $4.25 million in 25 with an option for 26 worth $6 million or a $750,000 buyout. So that's
I always love those. I just, with something we don't really talk a lot about, but okay, we're not going to keep you for next year, but here's $750,000 to say goodbye.
Yep. It's part of the agreement, right? You're good, you get $6 million. You're bad, you get $750,000. So now, if you remember, Rea actually pitched for the Cubs in 2020, so he's been on the team. He's also been on the Brewers for 3 out of the last 4 seasons. He missed one because of injury, but he's not only familiar with the Cubs organization, but he's familiar with skipper Craig Counsell. That works out, obviously. There's no adjustment period for Rea, whether you're talking about the skipper, whether you're talking about like knowing all the little things there is when you're moving to a city like Chicago, a new organization, like say like Kyle Tucker's probably having to look for a place to live and schools and all those type of things. You don't have to worry about that stuff. So last season, Rea was 12-6 with a 4.29 ERA. In 27 games with 32 starts. He pitched 167 2/3 innings, 135 strikeouts. He's a swing man, Dustin, similar to Javier Assad. The problem, though, Dustin, with Rea is that he pitched really well in the first half of the season and awful in the second half. Pre-All-Star game, he was 9-3 with the 3.77 ERA. You take that, right?
Yes, you would.
Post-All-Star, he's 3-3 with a 5.17 ERA. By the time it got to September, Rea's ERA for the month of September, Dustin, 8.31, and he was left off the Brewers playoff roster. So as friend of the pod, Joe Johnson from Obvious Shirts points out, last season, Rea was 1-0 with a 2.45 ERA and 30 Ks in 5 appearances for the Cubs. So at the very least, our Northside team won't have to face him this year. But again, not a Jack Flaherty. Moves, a guy that'll give you a lot of innings. He'll give you the innings. Don't know how good they're going to be in the second half, but still just, I just don't know, Dustin. We keep talking about Craig Counsell and we need to build a 90-win team. I don't know right now, today, talking to you on Sunday, January 12th, if the Cubs are the division favorites. To me, they haven't done any. I mean, obviously the Kyle Tucker move, he's about a 5-win player. He gives you about 5 wins. So that puts you at what, 88 wins?
88. Yeah, they're still not a 90-win team on paper.
No. And I don't need, and again, until you show me you can beat the Brewers, to me, the Brewers are the favorites going into the season, unless they can make a big time move. They've made one big time move with Kyle Tucker. Everything else has just been kind of smaller moves. Joining me now on the Fly the podcast, we're happy to have our old friend Matt Trueblood on from Northside Baseball. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Doing great, Crawly. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm hoping that all these football games end and then everyone comes back to baseball and everyone can sit next to you and I. But, just pondering this offseason, to think of, and I wanted to have you on. Reading your and you had one that caught my eye this morning about who we were talking about in segment one, Kyle Tucker. And a lot of people are concerned right now with the Cubs as far as the arbitration deal and just kind of what they're doing with the money. And I thought you kind of had some interesting points on that. And hopefully you can talk some of the Cubs fans off the ledge.
Yeah, I don't think of that really as my job most of the time. I'm not exactly famous for being a blind defender of what the Cubs are up to on the whole. But I think in this case, first of all, with the arbitration thing, it really is just part of the process. And it's a frustrating process, especially to watch play out in public sometimes. But it also, there's some really good aspects to this process too. It avoids things like prolonged holdouts at the beginning of spring training, which were the norm in the middle of the last century and went by the wayside once this process came into place. This is how it's supposed to work. Now, ideally, you just meet with a guy and get a number that you're both comfortable with and move right along. But that doesn't always have to be the case. And it doesn't always have to be a bad sign if it doesn't happen. And as I wrote today at Sunday at Northside Baseball, sometimes there are other reasons why a team might be making choices about how to spend and how carefully to count their dollars that aren't just about that player in a vacuum.
That's kind of what I wanted to take a look at. And so as you kind of point out in your article, the Cubs are 13th right now among MLB teams as far as the dollars are concerned. And I think a lot of us were looking at those Bellinger bucks and we were spending them faster than Jed could count them. And you kind of talk about some of the different aspects of that money. And why don't you kind of walk our listeners through that?
Sure. So on the surface, I think the Cubs have, I would call it about 35 million. You could safely say 40 million if you wanted to. You could be more conservative and say 30 million that they still have to spend this winter. And if they don't spend another dime, then we'll all be united. I don't think there's anyone who's saying they could stop right now and that's just fine. But the way the offseason plays out, there are still a lot of talent out there to be pursued in various ways. Expensive players that other teams are trying to trade and top free agents who fit the Cubs' need. It may not be as rich a set of options as there was 2 months ago, but that's how this thing works. There are still many paths for them to spend some of that money. Why might they not spend every dollar of it? Or why haven't they spent it all already and gotten up to whatever the line that Tom Ricketts has drawn in the sand is? It may have a lot to do with the possibility of contract extensions, because those extensions, depending on who's signing them and what shape they take, they'll have a certain impact on this year's budget, but probably a small one. Usually those extensions involve more money paid out down the line, and they tend to be backloaded deals with progressive salaries that climb over time. But that affects, that has a minimal effect on the 2025 budget. It can have a big effect on your competitive balance tax number. And if the Cubs don't want to go over that $241 million line this year, it's pretty clear they don't, then they have to consider all of the potential effects of signing Pete Crow Armstrong to a long-term deal, if that's something they want to explore. Justin Steele, if they'd like to just gain cost certainty on him for the remainder of his team control these next 2.5 years or 3 years, or if they want to go even farther with him. Or if they still are holding out hope on a Kyle Tucker extension, and I don't think there's any reason they shouldn't be, a Tucker extension in a couple of different ways could have a big effect on what other amount they can afford to spend this offseason. And, of course, on the urgency of spending that money. If he's going to be around for the next decade, 2025 is still important, still very important. But it's no longer feeling like an all-in year in the same way that it is if he's only going to be around this year. So they just don't want to overcommit themselves before they know whether or not locking any of those players or a couple of others up to long-term deals is a road they want to pursue.
And so Tucker said he'd be open to an extension. I think Jed made some sort of, comment that was, you always want a player like Kyle Tucker on your team. And so I think you and I are both in agreement that this is not going to go to an arbitration hearing. It's just not. They'll settle before then. But that idea of, is Kyle Tucker, going to sign an extension, and do the Cubs have to kind of, how they look at that as far as, within that budget for the.
I think what you're asking basically is how a Tucker deal specifically would affect both the 2025 budget in real dollars that Tom Ricketts has set for Jed Hoyer and that competitive balance tax number. And it could be two different things based on how they structure the deal. But you're probably paying a signing bonus up front if you lock him up to a long-term deal. Also, if you attach that long-term deal to the money he's making this year, it has a huge effect on what his competitive balance tax number is for 2025. Either way, you want to be careful about that, not because, we all agree that Tom Ricketts should just authorize spending more of his money every year on the Cubs. But living in the reality that we have, Jed Hoyer has to navigate knowing that if I do sign Tucker to that long-term deal, it's either going to take a significant toll on what I can spend in 2025, or is going to limit what I can do just because I don't want to cross the tax and be stuck on the other side of that tax line starting last year, since they went over in 2024 and on without, indefinitely into the future. So they have to weigh that carefully. We all agree that signing Kyle Tucker to a long-term deal should be a top priority for this team. So even as we all are anxious to see how they'll spend the rest of this money, and definitely don't want them to leave too much of that money unspent and sell themselves short for what would kind of be a third year in a row that they're pursuing contention and not doing quite enough. We want to avoid that, but we also have to acknowledge that if there's a possibility of signing Tucker to that long-term deal, whatever accommodations have to be made around that, they have to make sure that that's still possible for as long as there's still a chance of that deal coming to fruition.
Yeah. And so the only trouble that I think a lot of Cub fans feel is you take a look at the board of players and who's kind of left there, like hypothetically, sign Colin Rea, who, no offense, isn't going to get the crowd fired up at Cubs convention. I'm not going to lie here. And so when you sat there and you're watching talent disappear, I guess the frustration a lot of Cub fans feel is like, you are trying to hope for the best possible outcome for a Colin Rea, right? Like he's first half Colin Rea and not second half Colin Rea. And that, boy, it's a lot of what ifs, and there's really not a lot of certainty. You are leaving yourself very little room for margin, and we've seen how that's affected the team the last couple of years, missing the postseason. Yeah,
and I think here we run into what an MLB offseason is like. We're all used to, or we all know what a hot stove season looks like, but we have to kind of reacclimate ourselves to it every year, because in between comes the NFL offseason and the NBA offseason. And these are salary capped leagues where, because of that very fact, you take care of your needs in order. Your biggest need, your biggest opportunity, the player you most want is the player you go get first. And then second, third, there's an order of operations, because you know how many dollars are available to be spent for yourself and throughout the league. It's not fluid. It's not a mystery. The information's not imperfect on any sides. There are even maximum deal amounts in the NBA that this player's signing for this amount specifically. In baseball, it's so different that we reach this stage of the winter and it's easy to panic a bit because we know the biggest addition they're going to make this winter is Kyle Tucker. But you sure feel like, boy, it's going to be a frustrating offseason if the second biggest addition they make is Matthew Boyd, is Colin Rea, is Carson Kelly. I'm here to say I'm very confident that none of those will be the second biggest addition they make this winter. That's still coming. And it could come. The reason why a Colin Rea signing right now doesn't look like it makes a lot of sense. They're overloaded with starting pitching depth, and especially those kind of back-end starters. Colin Rea is very similar to a Javier Assad or a Jordan Wicks. At this moment, doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense to load the roster up with another player like that. If, and this is just one scenario, but it's certainly a plausible one, if you engage with the San Diego Padres, who are trying desperately to cut some money and at the same time add to their own starting rotation and fill some holes elsewhere on their positional roster, and if the Padres are digging their heels in and saying, if you want Dylan Cease, we need to get Owen Casey and both Assad and Wicks, or one of Assad and Wicks and then Ben Brown. You can't afford to do that without signing someone like a Colin Ray. But right. You may not do it in that order. You may not make the trade and then scramble to backfill your rotation depth with someone like Ray. You might prefer to sign Ray first, so you know you're in a good position, and then make a trade like 2 pitchers and an Owen Casey for Dylan Cease. Now, would that move again sort of overbalance them toward we're really all in on 2025? Cease becomes a free agent at the end of the year. So does Kyle Tucker. That's a separate conversation. But that I'm giving one example there of when we see them sign a Colin Ray, it doesn't mean that that's who they envision as starting pitcher 4 or 5 for them. It might instead mean that they're in the works on or aware that they're going to get to at some point in the next few weeks a trade that'll send out some of what feels like surplus starting pitching depth to fill one of the other needs on the team, be that a back end reliever, one more bat to round out the positional side, or that higher class starting pitcher that we all still feel the starting rotation could use.
Well, I'm sitting here and wondering, Matt, you're a smart guy, and obviously Jed's going to have his feet to the fire because there's some people right now that are clearly not happy. I assume that I don't think they are going to sit there and come to an agreement because of CubsCon, but it wouldn't surprise me if a deal wasn't done by next weekend. But if you had an opportunity, the microphones are at CubsCon, you get a chance to ask Jed Hoyer any question you want. And Matt Trueblood of Northside Baseball is going to come up to the microphone. What question do you think you would want to ask Jed if you had that opportunity? I may steal your question, Matt. I'm not going to lie. But what question do you think you may ask Jed Hoyer if you had the opportunity at the mic?
That's a tough one because at this stage of the winter, what question do you want to ask a person in that position that you feel like they might answer honestly? I think what I'd most want to know is the one thing you might get him in the right mood to be forthright about, which is just what is your specific highest priority remaining? We know they would love to sign Roki Sasaki. We know they'd love to bolster that sort of closer relief ace type role. We know they'd probably like to slot someone in above or right next to Justin Steele and Shota Imanaga. And we know the positional side is probably not done. You need someone who fits nicely, sort of a nebulous positional need. Maybe someone to hedge against Matt Shaw at third base, who can also play other positions in case Shaw works out great, that kind of thing. I'd just like to hear him rank those priorities for us. Now, even that gives away some information. He'd probably lie to us or dissemble a bit.
Right.
But mostly I want to know where his thinking is on that. Because to me, that's the big question remaining this offseason. They still have these needs, but not all of them are pressing needs because they've already upgraded the bullpen. They've already upgraded the rotation. They've obviously already upgraded the lineup with Tucker and with Carson Kelly to sort of buttress Miguel Amaya at catcher. I'd just like to know where they feel that those resources most need to go, because I do believe that more resources are going to be poured in, whether it's a big trade that sends out some of what still feels like excess prospect depth at the very top of the system, or all of this money that still feels like it could be spent. They're going to send that somewhere. And what I'm curious to find out is where that's going to be, whether they feel it's more important to bolster the bullpen or the rotation, and what shape it might take if they do decide to add someone else to this lineup mix.
And when you talk about that, the question then goes, obviously you have a couple different ways you can do this. You can do it through trade. You can do it through looking at free agents. I mean, we know that the closer free agent market really hasn't moved that much. A lot of the big names are still on the board. So are they going to, but to me, it's Jed's kind of never really seemed comfortable giving big monies to closers. So, I mean, is that something you look at, you trading from the depth of the system to get that closer that you're looking for and trying to get a Jack Flaherty? Or, does he go with a guy like Yohan Moncada to see like a reclamation project to use behind Matt Shaw? There's just a lot of avenues that the Cubs can take. And as we're sitting in January, I think too, Matt, that some of it's part of like the way that the Dodgers and Yankees have gone at it. It just feels like those guys are just collecting every single player on the market. And as Cub fans who we get charged a lot of money, whether you're talking about tickets, beer prices, everything, there's just a lot that we sit there and we say like, okay, well, why are they able to do it so easily? And for us, there's just this line. This is, we want to win. I understand fiscal responsibility, but sometimes you got to sit there and kind of go after it,
Absolutely. And again, I think it's important to separate. I've believed for a long time that one of the underrated skills of an executive, that top level person, now it's Jed Hoyer, the last regime was Theo Epstein, that person who's at the top of the baseball operations department, one skill we should talk about far more is how good they are at dragging open the purse strings, at getting the owner to write the checks that they don't want to write. And Hoyer, frankly, isn't very good at it. And that's an issue. But it's harder and harder to find the executive who is good at doing that anyway, because owners have gotten, I will very purposefully not use the word smarter, but a little bit wiser to the games that their executives play with them, right? They're not going to overspend a single penny more than they want to in most situations. And unfortunately, the Ricketts family seems pretty rigid about that. They talk about it all the time. We give Jed a budget. What he wants to do with that budget is up to him. Ideally, the approach would be we give Jed a budget, and then if Jed comes back and says, I need a little more to get to where we want to go, we'll flex for it. That's never been what they say if you listen closely to them. So that's a Tom Ricketts issue. The Jed Hoyer issue is within the parameters you've been given, are you being aggressive enough? Are you willing to change and flex in your own way? Which this winter to me is in trade. There are interesting position players and starting pitchers available. At this point on the free agent market, the number of starters available is pretty limited. And I think if you really want to upgrade via free agency, the place to do it is that reliever pool, where, as you pointed out, Jed hasn't been comfortable shopping there. I think that's changed a bit. I think not like we have evidence that it's changed exactly, but I do think behind the scenes it has changed. I think they have resolved themselves to the idea that they may go make the big splash on a Tanner Scott, or more likely, they'll spend a large amount, but on a shorter term deal for someone like Kyle Finnegan or Kirby Yates. I think that's very possible. And then the big trade move that they would make, that's how, if they assess that the bigger need is on the positional side or in the starting rotation, that's where we could see a trade take care of it. You have to respond to the market, but you also have to work within the parameters ownership gives you. And unfortunately, in Hoyer's case, those parameters are much more limiting than for Andrew Friedman of the Dodgers or Brian Cashman of the Yankees.
I feel like that there was a time where that conversation you said, where here's the budget, hey, we need more to get there. I felt that was more of an open conversation. And then all of a sudden at 2018, 2019, right around there, that spigot kind of shut off. And I haven't seen it turned on yet. And when I saw the move to get Kyle Tucker, I kind of felt like that was the Cubs signaling we're back at the table. And I guess that's kind of where there was some frustration on my part, where it's like, well, now we're sitting here in this silly process, which again, I get the process. I get why it works. I get what it does. To me, though, when you're talking about a guy that you're hoping to make the cornerstone of your organization, you just say, yeah, that it's fine. I'm not going to play these tiny little games. Let's just get it done. What do you want? 17. Okay, fine. 17, whatever. It just, what is, Thielbar is making 2.5 million, right? I mean, seriously, it's not that big of a deal. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to try to relax, calm down, and say that Matt Trueblood is with me. And if they don't spend the money, then you and I are going to protest in front of Wrigley Field.
Yeah. Again, if there's not a big move left in this winter for the Cubs, then both Tom Ricketts and Jed Hoyer have failed you as fans.
I appreciate that, Matt. I think you're right on that. Now, where can our listeners find the article on Northside Baseball that we've been talking about?
Yeah, northsidebaseball.com. We're on both the socials at Northside Baseball. Come find us, hang out. It's a growing community with a lot of great forums and comment sections that are non-toxic. You know how bad comment sections can be these days. Ours are terrific, full of thoughtful people, and hope you'll swing by, sign up, and become a part of our community.
Absolutely, man. It's a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you jumping on here. And again, I wanted to give people another side of looking at this Kyle Tucker thing, and hopefully people can digest it. And there's a lot to go about it, but we all at the end are hoping for the same thing. And that's the Cubs having Kyle Tucker for a long time and the Cubs making a return to the postseason.
Absolutely.
You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It is season 4. It is episode number 3. The Cubs and Kyle Tucker arbitration debacle. Don't forget to leave us one of those 5-star reviews. Also, check us out on all the social media platforms. And you can email Crawly and I, flythew670@gmail.com. Tell us what you think about this Kyle Tucker arbitration situation. Also, you can watch us on the 670 The Score YouTube page. Crawly, it's that time in the podcast where we go around the bases, get you up to all the latest Cubs news and other big news from around MLB.
Yep, hot stove. Not a lot of moves since the last time we talked, but the relief pitcher market has been moving a little, right? We talked about in segment 1 that the Cubs acquired Matt Festa, so we got a reliever right there. A couple other relievers. Former Cub reliever Jorge Lopez signed a 1-year contract with the Nationals for $3 million plus incentives. You remember Lopez was DFA'd from the Mets last season. He had a meltdown, threw his mid over the fencing, but then the Cubs picked him up, right? The Cubs picked him up, and he did really good for the Cubs before
for a little bit. Yeah, and then he got hurt. Yep.
Yeah, but now he heads to Washington. I was hoping that, the Cubs would
Can you imagine his reception when he goes back to Shea? I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
That'll be something. That will be something.
But I thought that for me, he really fit in well with the Cubs, and so I'm not saying he's Tanner Scott or anything. I'm just saying that, when you're talking, I would rather have him than David Festa. That's just my opinion.
Okay. All right. So that's good. That's a good comp, right? That's a good comp.
Right. And so the Pirates signed left-handed reliever Caleb Ferguson to a 1-year, $3 million deal. No biggie right there. And then the Blue Jays signed one of the top relievers off the board, right-handed reliever Jeff Hoffman, 3 years, $33 million. Now, one player that always is kind of, always been kind of, people have been hearing about this player and the Cubs, Pete Alonso, the polar bear, right?
Gosh, you've been hearing. I mean, that's been like 2 years running, the potential of him, hitting bombs out of Wrigley Field.
But it doesn't seem like the Cubs are interested. They got Michael Busch, and they traded some really good talent to get Michael Busch.
They love Michael Busch.
But reports are coming out that Alonso's camp offered the Mets a 3-year deal with opt-outs at $93.3 million with deferred money, which would lower the deal's present-day value. The Mets, though, to me, it's kind of unusual because the Mets, we think of them as just being willing to throw money around. For some reason.
Not in this case. Not in this case.
And it doesn't seem like other teams. Again,
well, the thing is, Crawly, this is one where they're not bidding against anybody, right? Yeah. So you're bidding against yourself. So why would you throw the guy? Okay, here, Pete. We'll go 70. We'll go 65 over the 3 years. You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? $90 million. Where's your other offer? Who's the counterpiece here?
Right. And so the Mets are in no hurry. And Dustin, we saw it last year with all of the Bellinger 4, with all those guys that came to camp late. To me, for the Mets' sake, I can care less about the Mets. In fact, I hope it hurts them. But if I'm Pete Alonso, I want a deal done before camp starts. That's me. Who knows? Maybe he's going to sign a 1-year prove it deal similar to Cody Bellinger a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
if
but he
doesn't
shouldn't
get
do
what he
that.
wants.
If I were him, though, I wouldn't do that with the Mets, right? I wouldn't do that. I would look
Not with
elsewhere.
the Mets, with
I would
elsewhere.
look elsewhere. I would look elsewhere for that. All right, Cubs Con, Crawly. Cubs Con. What you got the timer going? You got like a countdown clock on your phone. You'll be heading down there. I'm guessing. Wednesday, Thursday. When exactly does Crawly leave the Western Burbs and hit the city for 3 or 4 days?
I leave Thursday. So Thursday
okay.
afternoon, I'll be heading down to the Sheraton.
Right.
And it's kind of nice. We did it last year because that snowstorm. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
I do.
Snowstorm that weekend. And so I went down Thursday to beat it. And we just had a blast. Just a laid back environment before the craziness of Cubs Con. So, you're not coming the day of when everyone else is and dragging your bags around and checking in. It was nice to just kind of just be in there and be ready. Now, if you were
broke a little news, Crawly. You broke a little news, huh?
Yeah. So last year, for all the years until last year, that you would always have a program with the dates, with the events and the attendees that were going. And last year was the first year they did a app. They had an app actually that you could get on your iPhone. I'm not sure how it works for Androids, but for the iPhone, they had an app, and it was really cool because you could create a schedule, do all these fun things. I miss the programs because I just like looking at them in the pictures and all that stuff. But the app was really, really cool. And so I sat there and I kept checking the app to see if they updated, and they didn't. And so on Thursday, what I did is I deleted the app and I re-downloaded it. And once I did that, everything populated for the 2025 Cubs convention. So if you take a look, and if you're on 670 The Score YouTube channel, this is the app right here, and it has everything as far as the schedule, the attendees. There's a lot of fun things that are going to be going on. One thing I'm excited about, Ed Hardig is going to be back, and so he's going to be talking about Cub Hall of Famers. He's going to be talking about a look at Cubs uniforms over the years. So that's going to be a lot of fun. He has another session talking about myths. So stories. A lot of people think that the Cubs lost a playoff game in 1984 because they didn't have lights. That's not true. It might have been for the World Series had they made it, but it was not. That's not the reason they played 3 games in San Diego. So it's going to be Ed Hardig is the Cubs historian, really fun guy to listen to. And when you take a look here, they kind of have the different sessions. So they have one called Broadcasting 101. Dustin, maybe you want to attend that one if you can make it down there. But I'm sure that's going to be Pat Hughes, obviously, and Boog Sciambi, JD, Ron Coomer, I'm sure will be there. And so that'll be fun.
Maybe Zach if DePaul doesn't have a basketball game.
Yeah, or maybe Zach will be the one that'll be leading the discussion, right?
Right.
They're going to have one with the Cubs pitching coaches, Cubs hitters learning to hit. So you got the Cubs hitting coaches coming out there, but there's a lot of things. One thing I'm really excited about is Cubs chats and Espanol. That's going to be Javier Assad, Kevin Alcantara, Alexander Canario, Daniel Palencia, and Miguel Amaya, hosted by friend of the pod, the Cubs Spanish broadcaster, Miguel Esparza.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And so, these guys that Spanish is their first language, sometimes we don't get to hear a lot about their thoughts, but they're really interesting characters. And I think that it'd be really, really fun. Ian Happ is going to do the Compound, his podcast. We don't have who's going.
So he does like a live he does a live version of it, Crawly. Is that how it works?
Yep. Then there's going to be Cubs pitchers. You're going to have Matt Boyd, Porter Hodge, Justin Steele, and Jameson Taillon, hosted by Jim Deshays. You're going to have Cubs hitters at the plate. Miguel Amaya, Nico Horner, Kyle Tucker, and Gage Workman are going to be there, hosted by Ron Coomer. And one thing we'll get more into this in the next podcast, talking about everything. There is no Ricketts Family Forum, in case you're wondering. But Tom Ricketts did this last year, is that there's a Don Shula's. It's a steakhouse in the Sheraton. And rather than have the question and answer, he sits there and everybody kind of comes in and grabs a beer and talks to Tom. But you really don't get like a lot of one-on-one time. And it's not anything that's obviously recorded by people in a hall. So probably a safer venue for Tom to kind of do that, right?
I will tease this. I am hoping that Tom Ricketts will be joining the Mully and Haw show this week ahead of CubsCon.
Okay, I'm going to have my questions ready for you, Dustin, to
email me some questions.
I'll email you some questions. I got questions.
Get our own version. We'll get our own little interview without interviewing him done potentially. But that is something to look forward to. Hopefully Tommy Hotovy will be joining Mully and Haw this week. Matt Shaw might join Mully and Haw this week. Ron Coomer probably joins Mully and Haw, our guy Bruce Levine. So lots to look forward to.
Well, it's fun. And what people don't realize is that a lot of the prospects are coming in today, Sunday. And so they'll be doing things at Wrigley Field, taking classes, checking out the locker room. So there's going to be a lot of people there. So it's a great time to be a Cub fan and great time to listen to 670 The Score, because you guys are going to have, especially the Mully and Haw show, are going to have just a ton of great guests. One other thing before we kind of wrap this one up, Dustin, we've been talking about the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes. So yes, we are getting closer and closer to a Sasaki decision date. Now, here's one thing to keep in mind. International free agent signing for 2025 opens up on January 15th. That's when you sign. That's when you can start signing your international free agents. And so before that date, a lot of times you kind of come up with handshake agreements prior to, right? And then the day of that day, the 15th, you'll see a lot of texts of players, international players signing their deals on the 15th. So usually the deals are made beforehand. And then on the 15th, they finalize it. They put pen to paper and it's all done. Okay. But baseball fans all over took notice. We talked about Francis Romero has a very good relationship with a lot of Latino players, a lot of Latino agents and stuff like that. He put this out there and it made people go, And that's that the Dodgers have brought back to market two of their highest bonuses for the upcoming 24-25 international signing period. Shortstop Darryl Morel from the Dominican Republic. So they had a deal with him for $1.1 million. And outfielder Orlando Patena from Venezuela, $400K. And who cares, Crawly? $1.5 million, not a big deal for the Dodgers. But again, it's a separate pool of money that they have. And so what's going to happen now is that the Dodgers said, you know what? If you want to sign with somebody else, you can do that. And that's what happened. Darryl Morel, who the Dodgers were going to sign, okay, on the 15th, is going to sign with the Pirates. And so what teams are going to do, if they think they're in the Sasaki sweepstakes, they may be clearing the deck and telling, okay, you know what? We cannot promise you. We said we were going to do 1.5 million. Well, we can't really promise you that. So if you got someone else that will, you're free to go ahead. We'll let you out of the agreement. And so this is going to be for the teams that are still in the Sasaki sweepstakes that we've talked about. And the Cubs being one of those teams, it becomes a complicated situation because you may have a guy, and these international free agents, the Cubs have a lot of them on the team right now, right? Like Miguel Amaya, guys like that, Javier Assad. These are guys that, they may not be important now, but in 4 or 5 years, they're going to be something. And the Cubs have a really good international free agent class that they're looking to sign. But if you think that you are in the Sasaki sweepstakes, do you want to have as much international bonus money as possible? So now, because they did that, the Dodgers upped their ability to spend to $3.6 million. So they cleared up $1.5 million. They're now at $3.6 million. So this becomes an issue to watch with the Cubs and other teams. If, say, on the 15th, you see the Cubs signing a bunch of international free agents, maybe they know that they're not in the Sasaki sweepstakes anymore. So the 15th is coming up. That's on Wednesday. And so you want to kind of take a look there. Are there teams like the Dodgers, like the Cubs, some of the other teams that we said that were in this sweepstakes, the Padres being one of them, that are not signing international free agents on that date? Keep that in mind as we move forward this week.
All right, big week ahead, Crawly. That's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow on all the socials, Facebook, Instagram, X. You can email us, flythew670gmail.com, and you can watch us by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel. Crawly, have a good rest of the weekend. Not much left. We'll get back together midweek and really preview CubsCon and get you off and running for your Super Bowl, if you will.
I'm super excited. I can't wait to talk to all the listeners. They're always great coming up to me during the convention, but this is going to be a lot of fun. Crazy week coming up, and we will have everything covered and that CubCon preview on the next Fly the W podcast. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!